Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 1% Better Recruitment podcast with your host, Charles Kiriakou. Today, we have a very special episode because it's the first time I've had two guests, not one, on the same episode. And I'm really, really excited because I'm joined by Shane and Bobby from Elev8 Learning. Shane and Bobby, how's it going?
All right, yeah. How are you, mate?
Yeah, good. I'm really excited. I have to say before we start recording, I joined the L&D, well, it was 2.0 back then, it's called 3.0 Facebook chat when I got into L&D because I had zero L&D experience. And Bobby was one of the first people that actually reached out to me, gave me a bit of a helping hand when I got into the L&D industry. And when I started thinking about setting up a business, Bobby has basically given me tons of advice. So yeah, really, really excited to do this episode today. I've had the pleasure of meeting Shane as well. And yeah, we've got loads to talk about. But before we do get into it, for people that may not know either of you, if you don't mind, give us a bit of an introduction.
After you, Bobby. I'll let you go first.
Go on, Shane. Age before beauty.
All right, then, fine. So, hi everyone. I'm Shane. I'm one of the two directors of learning of Elevate Learning, alongside Bobby. I've been in recruitment for about 8, 9 years now. Moved into L&D 2.5, 3 years ago. Predominantly working across STEM, perm more probably than contract. And I tend to really help people define and create effective sales processes. That's really where I work. The two of us, I'm the person that tends to get more into the nitty gritty and talk about how to actually action a lot of the stuff, where Bobby does a lot more kind of the strategic thinking. So that's probably a little bit around me. Bobby, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, I'm Bobby. I've been a recruitment trainer and coach for the last 8, 9 years, having been a trainer myself, having been a recruiter myself for three. Started off at S3, like everyone seems to have done in the world of recruitment. Unlike most people, I'm not going to tell you I was a global top biller. I'll leave that to other people. But yeah, I've been helping recruiters from kind of coming into the world of recruitment all the way through to management and everywhere in between for the past 7, 8 years. And yeah, I generally tend to go off the idea that I let people learn from the mistakes that me and I've seen other people make.
Love it, love it. Well, oftentimes when I start these episodes, I start to get really excited because, from a selfish point of view, I always come away learning absolutely loads. And as a fellow trainer, coach, etc., I feel like I'm going to come away learning loads. But one of the first topics us three discussed was bringing the right people into your business. Now, for anyone listening or watching this, if you've listened to watch some of the previous episodes, I've talked a lot about this topic with people, and we talk a lot about vetting people out of recruitment because I've seen it, and I'm sure you guys have seen this as well with companies that do like trainee academies, etc. And when you're doing an academy, you can kind of almost tell from like day one that there are certain people, and you scratch your head and go, "How the hell did they get through the interview process? I don't really understand." So I guess we'll start off and we can have an open conversation about this, but and I guess every recruitment business is different, right? But how do businesses bring on the right people?
God, right. Let's start off with making sure that first and foremost, I think behaviors are the most important thing. And looking at which particular behaviors make the most sense for each business. So we generally tend to work with people that have, I guess my frustration with the world of recruitment started when it would get to about, November hires at S3, and it would play into kind of headcount bonuses for managers. And I would see some people hired, and I'm there going, why are these people here? And I was their induction trainer, and I could already see that they
Mm.
weren't going to work out, but it just became that perpetuating cycle of nonsense, really. And so, having trained the best part of 3,000 recruiters, possibly more now, I think the key thing is identifying the key behaviors you want, and that is, people talk about drive and ambition, but I did a session recently and asked people about their the best hiring processes they've seen. None of them talk about vetting drive and ambition. And it was like,
Interesting.
well, so you're asking for these things, and then you see people leave because they don't have the right drive and ambition. You do nothing about it in your
Mm.
interview process. One of the other things that I've noticed is people kind of look at particular behaviors or competencies, whatever you want to talk about. Let's say customer focus as an
Mm.
example, but they don't define it. And it's weird because customer focus for some people is, oh, can they just write an email to a client? and can they write things and not necessarily mess up a client
Mm.
relation. For other people, it's can they negotiate, and we're not vetting for those subtle differences in the interview process. And so I guess what I generally say to my customers is to essentially, hire slow but fire quick if you need to,
Hmm.
and actually define a proper process that sees that you're getting multiple people engaged. So it's not just your echo chamber kind of making that decision, but also that you're vetting all the right behaviors that you're looking for.
Mm. Well, just on that, before we go to Shane, because I'm keen to hear what Shane thinks. I think drive and ambition in recruitment are absolutely pivotal, right? And I can't remember who said it, but someone, I don't really actually want to say their name because I know who it is and I don't want to give them any credit for it. But they say hire people with a PhD, basically people that are poor, hungry, and driven. Right. Now I think about when I got into recruitment, my mum was on benefits, she was disabled, we didn't have money, and I was on £150 a week, and I wasn't able to earn commission until I passed my apprenticeship. Imagine how bloody driven I was, and how ambitious I was, and how willing I was to work really, really hard. But that's because I came from that sort of background. What about for someone that hasn't come from such a turbulent sort of background and stuff like that? So how do you implement that into an interview process? How do you test for drive ambition? How do you even know what that specifically, how do you measure that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that PhD thing is, yeah, I struggle with that because I've seen some, people from decent backgrounds,
Yeah.
not necessarily the poor side of things, but I think how can you understand what that chip on the shoulder is? And
Mm,
everyone's got that chip on the shoulder. It's whether they feel like they're not good enough, whether they're not good enough compared to other people. Those are the things that you can then work out whether they've got the right drive.
mm,
So there's a person who runs a business now who was a trainee that I trained up. He had that motivation. He's, from a well-to-do family, all that kind of stuff. Was an
mm,
ex-footballer, doing okay. But his best mates were people like Reese Wabara, who's now kind of created a clothing line. He knows the Gymshark people, and they were all part of that group of friends.
mm,
And funny enough, he wasn't the one person that was doing as well as the others, and that was
mm,
his drive. So I think it's going into that. What is the thing that drives you? That and how does that thing manifest itself? Could be two easy questions that and also what happens when things don't go your way, because the problem, and I've said this recently, and it's something that I really stand by, is recruitment is for people who've overcome adversity.
I
you
believe
know
in that.
you need to so whether it's pro, hungry, and driven, doesn't matter. It's how, tell me about adversity and how do you overcome it,
Mm.
because that's when you realize that people can really handle recruitment.
That's I want to go to Shane in a second, but that I think if you're a hiring manager that is listening to this, or maybe you're a recruiter that's interviewing at the moment and you want to prep for questions and stuff, I think that's a brilliant question to ask. And whenever I interviewed, I would always ask them about the adversity they overcame, and sometimes you would get kind of fluffy answers like, oh, uni was a little bit difficult, but I managed to get a 2-1, and you're like, right, so where was the actual adversity in that? Tell me a little bit more about that. Oh, it was quite difficult because, I'm not very good at studying, but I still managed to do it. And I'm just sat there and I scratch my head and I'm like, right, okay, that doesn't really seem, I mean, I could be wrong. I never went to university. I wasn't smart enough to go to university, but that doesn't really seem like that serious adversity. Meanwhile, I speak to people that done rugby, football, martial arts, etc., and they tell me about, they tore their hamstring and they still carried on with the match, and then they got they won the tournament, or they did a fight camp and things like that. And you think, holy shit, actually, you've literally and figuratively been knocked down and had to get back up again. That's actually quite tangible and relatable to recruitment.
Yeah, do you know what? I totally agree. I do. Interesting that you mentioned the sport analogy there, because
Mm,
you've probably seen it, Bobby. I know we've seen it. There's a lot of ex-sport people that tend to fall into recruitment.
mm,
Funnily enough, I've ended up, well, we probably all ended up training a fair few of them, right?
hmm
Um, Even there, some have worked and some haven't. So something I think it's really, really important for anyone who's hiring to be mindful of is that they don't see a persona or a type of person, right? And go, right, well, we've had three people who've come from a sporting background and they've worked because we've gone and we've asked them all the right questions.
mm,
So person four will go a little bit lax on that. right? And you see it all the time. Bobby's lights going off. So I think one of the, the key things is to make sure that once you've got this defined model, you don't let any kind of bias or
Mm,
persona-driven bias seep into it, because then
mm,
it can become like that's where it begins to go wrong for me.
mm. So what are you saying, that if you have hired, let's say for example, you're a small recruitment agency, you've got four recruiters and you're the founder,
Yeah.
and all four of your recruiters that have been with you over a year, one's a swimmer, one's a rugby player, one's an ex-footballer, one's a boxer, in their spare time or whatever. Are you saying to check your bias and don't just dismiss people that maybe haven't come from a sports background? Is that what you're saying?
So I'm saying the first thing I'm saying is that, yeah, I'd say check your bias. Don't dismiss people who haven't come from that background, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of people out there who don't come from that background who are
Hmm.
fantastic
Yeah,
recruiters,
I
right? From
agree.
any kind of background. But what I'm probably more saying actually is, if you're then going to bring in someone else of a similar background, make
Hmm.
sure you are every bit as rigorous as you were with those first four people, and don't start to fall into the trap of thinking someone will be a success, because everyone's story is fundamentally so different.
Mm.
And I think there's a great question that we've spoken to a lot of agencies about using, which kind of encapsulates two parts of the recruitment journey. Is you will have to stay late sometimes. Yeah, we see it all the time on LinkedIn. People going ham on this idea of recruiters having to work beyond the
Yeah.
contracted hours. That's when candidates are available. You might have a contract role that comes in at 3 o'clock that you need to resource, because if you don't, someone else will beat you to it, right? Other someone will
Hmm.
work harder than you. So let's say, for example, you've got to 6:30 at night, and you know
Hmm.
you're not done for the day, and there's three things to tick off that to-do list. It's been an awful day. Okay. What is the thing that you could put as a picture on the left or the right of you or wherever, that you could look at and say, I'm doing that for this reason? What is
Love
your
that.
tangible thing? And then when you've got it, we always encourage recruiters to then, or sorry, managers to use the recruiter in them.
Mm.
Because whenever you talk to candidates, right, we all train this, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Ask why
Yeah.
again, then
Yeah.
ask why a third time.
Yeah.
Use that in the hiring process, right? You need to be able to delve a little bit, because actually, and I know we're coming on to talking about onboarding,
Mm.
the answer that someone gives here is going to impact how you can help that person when they come on board, and the things that you can do to help push them to become the best they can be. So I think there's got to be an element of, number one, removing any bias that you have.
Yeah.
And then number two, getting something tangible and then
Mm.
digging down into it to really find that crux. Seems like you enjoyed that one, Charles.
Yeah, honestly, like for anyone that's listening and you're not watching, the whole time what Shane was just saying there, I was smiling ear to ear, because what you just said there resonated so freaking much. Because when I was a manager, I used to do so Andrew Silito has like the four keys, right? And I basically added an extra one and called it the five pillars of projectors. So when I was a manager, I'd always drill down into what their quarterly relationship goal, business, finance, health, and mindset goals were. And then once we kind of got a bit of an understanding of what they're working towards every quarter, I drill into like exactly what you just said. Like, what is one tangible thing? What is a reason why you're working hard, staying late, etc.? What do you want to buy? What do you want to do? Some people aren't as materialistic. The older I got, I didn't want watches and cars and stuff like that. I wanted to save to move out. I wanted to save for an engagement ring, like the older things in life, right? And then, like you said, as soon as I got there, it was like, what's the next thing? And in my last company, when we were going, you know what it was like a couple of years back, the market was like really, really good, then really, really bad. There was a lot of people that were like scratching their head, like, why am I working so late? This is such a grind. And myself and my L&D consultant, we sat everyone down individually for an hour and really tried to understand what their why was. Like, why the fuck are you doing this job? I always say to people, recruitment is the easiest, hardest job you'll ever do. You only need to find a candidate for a job and vice versa, but it's fucking hard. It's really, really hard in that respect. So you need to be able to come in every single day and know why you're coming in, because you're going to get metaphorically punched in the face multiple times. And if you don't have something to work towards, what's your reason to get up? Anyway, that's my little rant there. That was my.
Just out of interest, I'll throw a question back at you, Charles, and Bobby, if that's okay.
Mm,
What nowadays, because I think it's actually changed in the last
mm,
few years. What are you hearing are the big whys? The reasons that are coming out more and more? Because I think my answer for that at the moment is probably the one that we hear probably more than anything else is financial freedom.
Mm,
Is that ability to go and do anything that people want to do. And it's not so much oh, I want a car, I want a house, all that kind of stuff. And it might be because to the generation that are coming into the market now, those are so far in, like that's such
yeah.
a long term goal that it doesn't
Hmm.
have that tangible element. But what are you kind of hearing, Charles? What are the big whys
It's
you're
it's really interesting because what you've just mentioned there is very similar. I don't really hear a lot of people these days, like when I was 20, 22 years old in recruitment, it was all everyone in the office, it was all about buying a brand new car and having enough money for a deposit. And bear in mind, that was only what that's not even 10 years ago. It was
hearing?
only like 7 years ago. It's like the economy is a bit crap, right? But it wasn't like that much, like, house prices weren't as crazy different like 6, 7 years ago. But I can't remember the last time I spoke to a recruiter that was like, I want to buy a house or, I want to buy a car. I think there's a few, I would say more so the like boys, like young sort of 20-year-old boys that like, I want to buy a Rolex or, I want to get this and I want to get that. But I think a lot of it is I don't want to have to go into my overdraft to come into work. I don't want to have to go to the bar and then not be able to afford to buy a girl or you better to go out to drinks with my girlfriends, whatever. I think like you said, but it's very difficult to really like when as a coach, and you guys know this, when you're trying to set a tangible goal with someone and they say just financial freedom, you're like, okay, but what does that actually mean? And when they say things like, I just want to be able to not have to worry about finances, and you're like, how the fuck do you like write this down and actually make this a tangible goal? It's really,
Yeah,
really challenging.
I ask a question. What figure do you need to see in your bank account to make that figure possible? To make that possible.
Yeah.
And because funny enough, again, coming back from what 2016 when I first started kind of training recruiters, you could easily say it was houses and stuff like that.
Mm,
Now you're absolutely right. I think a lot of it is now experience based. I want to go on
mm.
holiday. I want to be able to
Yeah,
enjoy my time.
definitely.
I want to be able to do things with the people that I love. As Shane you mentioned, it's because do I want to find increasingly difficult house buying situations? Do I want that?
Mm,
Even the Rolexes, it's so impossible to buy one. So what is the point? And
mm,
so that there's a lot of those what is the point style questions that drive people's behavior.
mm. It's interesting. Well, back what we were talking about getting the right behaviors for a business. I can't remember who it was I had on the podcast, and we talked about I think it was Louise actually. She's a rec to rec, and we were talking about the values, like when
Mm.
someone starts a business, and I've worked with businesses before, and if I speak to a new business now, and I always ask them like, what are your values and how are they expressed in behavior, both from leadership and from consultant level. And when I have a client that's like, oh, they're on the website, it kind of rings alarm bells in my head. So that then starts making me think, well, if I'm going to come in and train your new starters, and you don't know what your values are, what the correct behaviors are, then like you're kind of screwed in some way or another. But from your guys' perspective, what would you say are like the typical behaviors recruitment businesses look for at the moment?
Do you want to go first? I can take that one if you want, Bobby.
Yeah,
Go
you
ahead.
go for it.
Yeah, I think behaviors is an interesting one. I think a lot of businesses confuse this idea of values, the things that that are going to drive the business forward,
Mm,
with ways of working. And
hmm,
actually, what those businesses are thinking about is, right, we want this person to come in, we want them to work in this way, we want them to follow this kind of structure, this kind of pattern, because this is what works for us and this is
mm,
what we're going to do. In terms of external values, most of them are very similar. So,
mm,
relationship driven, expert,
mm,
um, what's what I'm looking for here? They pay attention to detail,
mm,
you know, excellence, all of that kind of stuff that threads through everything that people want to do. But actually, when people are bringing in new starters, I think there tends to be they'll look at those kind of values. Do they live by those values? Yes or no? And whether they do or don't, what we then see is a lot of friction when people come in with a completely different mindset, methodology, or way of
mm,
working.
hmm,
So it actually, I think, while values are really important to a business, I think actually it's going to be how can we get this person to understand how we work and why we work that way and how that works, and am I or are we open to someone coming in and challenging some of those ideas?
Mm.
Because if we're not, then we probably need to we need to look at bringing in people who meet this way of working.
Mm.
Because yeah, as I going back to it, even if they hit all of the values, all of those points, but they don't hit that way of working, there's going to be friction.
Mm.
You need someone who kind of meets both ideally. Um, but I guess the final point on that is if you're going to have values in there, you need to make sure they're lived throughout the business with everyone.
Yeah.
Not sure that 100% answers your question, Charles, but I
I was
think
going to say
around that
I'm
mark.
going to go I'm going to go rogue with this. And too many people have values and haven't ever really thought about how they would implement them in their businesses.
Mm.
And you know, I think Shane's right. You want to look at ways of working. Sometimes values aren't necessarily that important for some people, and that's absolutely fine. But you can underpin your values based on the practices you have.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, we see a lot of people talking about, things like, oh yeah, I've seen lots of business owners talking about, oh yeah, never ghost anyone. Great. But yet you're the ones that are ghosting other people. And so if you're not living the values that you set, those values are absolutely pointless.
Yeah.
So ideally have a way of working, as Shane rightly pointed out. Look at those ways of working that work for you. And funny enough, that's kind of been the reason why we've been working on something in the background around a psychometric for recruiters about how people work,
Mm.
not necessarily looking at their personality types, because in all honesty, as we all know, different personalities can be a success in recruitment.
Mm.
Different backgrounds, different behaviors, different colors, different creeds, it doesn't matter. If you're just living the working values and the working processes, those are when you can work on it. I mean, there are some great businesses that are really kind of living their values, and they are fantastic businesses.
Hmm.
And I'd love to do loads more work with some of those businesses. I'm not gonna lie to you. But then, there's also those businesses that need some of that help and guidance, and that's where we seem to find ourselves at the moment. But yeah, I think for some people, it's almost like if you don't half-ass it, if you don't know how you guys want to implement certain values, lots of people talk about honesty, integrity, empathy,
Mm.
relationships, and all those things. And then if you're actually going to live those things, then find the right people that live those things.
Yeah.
If you don't, then don't bother just hiring people because you said so.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. I think that if you're going to discipline someone, like I'm echoing exactly what you just said, but if you're going to discipline someone, because they're being quote toxic, right? We hear this all the time, like a top biller's just turned into a complete knobhead, right? It 9 times out of 10 is because they're doing things outside of what the company deemed to be right, which is what values typically are, right? Is what we deem to be important, what is
Mhm.
right to us, what our code that we live by, right? So when you do see, and sometimes, and I've heard people say, oh, values are a load of shit because you go on a website and it says honesty, professionalism, and it's just they've just gone on chat gpt and said give me 4 values that are suitable for a recruitment business, but it exactly what you guys have just said. It's there's no point in having those values if you don't live them. And I wrote a post about this. Obviously, this episode will come out in God knows when, but I wrote a post ages ago when you're listening to this. But it was about ghosting, and it's exactly what you said there, Shane. That they'll say, "Oh, we don't ghost people, blah blah blah." Yeah, us three here are probably reaching out to managing directors and founders of recruitment firms, and we're getting ghosted. It's fine, water off ducks back for us. But it's like, hang on a minute, you say you
Yeah.
don't ghost people, you're doing that. So when your recruiter does that, like, what the hell is wrong with you? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, going on that, there's a reason why people ghost, and people seem to forget. People think about the action, not the cause.
Mm,
And it could be a couple of things. It could be that your proposition isn't that attractive, and therefore it's not worth me coming back to you.
yeah,
It could also be that I'm uncomfortable having a conversation about this, and therefore I'd rather avoid it than try and tackle the real problem. And both of those things are absolutely fine. They're human behaviors.
mm,
It's about how we go about making those things easier to come against. If someone struggles to have that conversation, just put something out there and say, look, I know you might not want to have this conversation, but I'm a big boy. I can handle the rejection. Just let me know what your thoughts are. It doesn't really matter, but unfortunately we seem to dwell too many things on too many of these behaviors that aren't
mm,
necessarily that big an issue. It's
yeah,
how you go about living things. And actually, if you say honesty, integrity, and professionalism are your 3 pillars, just live them. Show people, demonstrate to people that you're actually doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. Just one thing on what you just said there, Bobby, because I'm a huge believer that I can have those difficult conversations. I've been ghosted by plenty of clients and all the rest of it. So if I get a proposal from someone, I want to go back to them. But when I was looking for an accountant when I set my business up, I got a proposal for an astronomical rate, like just ridiculous. And I was like, I looked at it and scratched my head. I was like, that's a joke. Surely I'm not going to go back to that. And I felt really, really bad, but I just never got back to the guy. And the guy just said exactly what you just said, just sent an email. Hey, haven't heard from you. What were your thoughts? And I just came back and said, hi, mate. So sorry. I feel really bad I didn't get back to you, but I found a better deal elsewhere. Nothing against you, nothing against your services, but I'm going to go with the other person. No worries. Thanks, Charles. Done. But it was exactly what you just said there, Bobby. And it's really interesting because I didn't really actually think about that. That the human behavior, the psychology behind it is I had a better deal. Why the fuck am I going to go back to it? And also, it's a bit awkward to then go and say that I found someone for way cheaper. But it's from a recruitment perspective, you just have to do that little bit of a follow up, like the example you gave there. I think that's class.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, we don't necessarily have behaviors on our website, as it were, but two of the things that we probably kind of pride ourselves on more than anything else are empathy and authenticity. Because we're ourselves.
Mm.
We try and understand people's point of views, and that's all we can ever be. And certainly as L&D consultants or whatever you want to call us, that's all we ever can do.
Mm.
So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Well, I think we talked a lot about kind of the right types of people coming into the business, unless there's anything else you want to add. But I do think it's very subjective on the business, the market, whether it's contract, perm, there's just so many different things. But there's a lot of there that I've personally taken away, and hopefully people have taken away. So if let's just say, for example, a business has listened to this episode and now they've nailed onboarding the right people, what would we say are what's the right approach to onboarding? Because that's the number one thing I hear these days, since I've been running my business, is like, once the new people start, Charles, then we'll get you in and do this type of stuff. And I asked them the question, what does your onboarding look like? We give them a laptop, we give them LinkedIn Recruiter, and then I'll sit next to them and we'll listen to some of their calls live. And it's like, realistically speaking, how many businesses actually do anything for the
Yeah.
onboarding? Do you know what I'm trying to say? So yeah,
Well, I was
talk
going to
talk
say
me through that.
the CIPD have said that 85% success rates of new starters within businesses happens if they have a proper onboarding plan in place.
Mm.
And that is not, that isn't just give them a laptop. Oh, here's some online learning. There you go.
Yep.
It's looking ideally 3 to 6 months in the future and see what you want to actually create.
Mm.
And so if you can see what you want out of someone in 3 to 6 months time, let's be honest, more likely 6 than 3. But unfortunately, recruitment business owners want everything to happen in 3. And you've got to look at it and go, right, again, what does competency look like
Mm.
in whatever areas they are? And there could be so many different things. It could be, are they bought into the business? Are they bought into the idea of, being able to qualify or vet or screen or register a candidate effectively? I get so confused with what people call candidate qualification. Um, but if you're looking for those things, work for the end goal and work backwards.
Mm.
So then you can then start to create a plan of action. And so we do onboarding kind of plans and documents for companies because they really struggle with it, and that's cool. But actually, think of what kind of things will create the right behaviors to see the end product. Who can we get involved? And I don't just mean senior people. It could be, who is the best person at qualifying candidates in your business? Who is
Mm.
the best person at business development? How can we get them running sessions with people to feel invested? I'd love to say that, as 3 trainers on the call, we could do all of it, but why do that when you can get people in the business who can give them that authenticity,
Yep.
the kind of the company's way of doing things a
Hmm.
lot easier.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, think about what you want people to do each week. What are the measures of success for that week?
Mm.
Because if you're going to get people ramped up on KPIs, don't just get them speaking to a million candidates and when they don't actually know how to do anything. And so it's just little things that you can do. We were working with a business recently. We did a whole kind of 2 days a week for 4 weeks on absolutely everything within recruitment,
Hmm.
including like taking job brief forms. And after a while, they said, well, actually, none of them are learning those particular or need to use a job call form after 4 weeks because they're building a market from scratch.
Mm,
So funny enough, we changed it to say, well, actually, month one, then what we can do is get them working on finding candidates and then taking candidates out to market. That's all they need to do,
mm,
and then build on that. And so you've got to think about what do you want people to have achieved by the end of 3 months, but also by the end of month one, month two, month three, and
yeah,
then work backwards from there.
I love that. Yeah, it's very interesting because so many recruitment businesses have different expectations for what a new starter should achieve in their first week. And typically what you hear and see, and you guys can probably speak to this more, similar to what you just said there, Bobby, is we'll just get them on the phone qualifying candidates for the first couple of weeks to learn about their market, which I firmly believe that's the best way to learn is through candidates, right? But from a recruitment consultant's perspective, you're like, right, so I'm calling like dormant candidates on the database. Why? No one's teaching me how to qualify them. I'm having conversations with them. I'm building my network. What's the point? And then after 2 weeks, and your boss turns around and goes, cool, right, have you been working on Bobby's job? Shane's got a new job. Have you been working on that? You're like, I don't know how to do a bloody search. I've just got a list of candidates I've been speaking to. And then next thing you know, it's like, cool, right, so we've got a list of clients in the database. We need you to go and get some jobs on. You're like, well, fucking, how do I do that? Just what listening? Do
Absolutely.
you know what I mean?
Which is why your onboarding process needs to have learning and development at the point of when it's necessary. It could be, there's lots of video content out there, but I think it needs to be a blended approach to,
Yeah.
of at desk mentoring,
Hmm.
at desk instruction, because coaching isn't necessarily something that you need very much of right at the beginning of your career, because
Yeah.
coaching is, hey, I know my game, how can I get the most out of it, right?
Yeah.
And so and so if you can create a blended approach to those things and then create assessment, there are so many people that don't test whether anyone's competent in anything, and then expect people and then say, oh, well, you haven't passed your probation. But what based on?
Yeah.
And so it's, if you haven't got any bases, then what's the point in having a probation period? In fact, why not just not bother having one and see, have a competency period or call it that?
Mm.
But yeah, it just frustrates me, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, no, I could, and like I said before we clicked record, the one thing I've learned since doing this podcast is I want people coming on to talk about things they're passionate about, people that are going to get riled up about certain things. Otherwise, it turns into a boring show, which
Yeah, it's why we do what we do, because and that's probably for all three of us, because we want my infinite purpose is that I want to leave recruitment better than I found it. And so for that, if like my personal story is that I started at S3 within, I think it was about I think it was no 3 months, sorry, my manager left, and I was
oh
like,
crap.
okay, how the hell do I do whatever I do?
Mm,
We had guest managers coming up from London or down from Manchester, and it was just a horrid onboarding
mm,
period. And so that's why I try and design onboarding periods to make sure that people don't have the experience I did.
mm. Yeah, it's so common, mate. It's so common. And when I was the L&D manager, that exact same thing happened when we hired someone really, really talented, and literally 3 months later, their director resigned. He was like the director of the company, and then like the managers in the team weren't really managers. We just had too many trainees, so we just naturally people got promoted because they were there through longevity and whatnot. And then one of the managers left, and then it became so challenging. But Shane, what do you think in terms of like onboarding people the right way? What types of things have you seen? What's your thoughts on it?
So I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but all of the onboarding stuff, it starts at the interview stage. It has to,
Mm,
right? And in the interview stage, what you're trying to align is how can I influence this person when they come on board? What's their drive? What's their ambition? And that's something that you need to go back to in week one, right?
mm,
What is their purpose? What's their reason for being here? How am I then going to be able to help this person through that first 12 weeks? What you also want to be doing at that interview point is talking about your ways of working, their ways of working, kind of
mm,
aligning them, right? And you're going to bring that into the conversation in week one. But from there, what you need to be doing is having probably weekly, bi-weekly, just dependent on, I'd say at least once every couple of weeks,
mhm.
meetings where what you've already done before you brought this person on board is said, this is where I need you to be at the end of 3 months, as Bobby said earlier.
Yeah.
Okay, in order to do that, these are the milestones for 2 weeks. These are the milestones for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, etc., all the way up to
Mm,
12. Incorporated into that is the assessment. Incorporated into that, I think, especially because, as you've rightly pointed out, Charles, people care about building market knowledge, building market
Yep.
information, yeah, is actual market knowledge assessments, which
Hmm.
we think probably should run once a month.
Yeah.
I
And there
like
should
that
be some
idea.
defined things that the person has to find out by the end of month one, with the caveat of then what else have you found out?
Mm.
Then the next month, these are all the things that we need you to know on top of what you already know. Then at the end of the third month, this is everything you now need to know. And by the end of that third month, someone should be, by that business's definition, strong or knowledgeable in their market. Okay. But
Mm.
then there's a set of other skills, a set of other competencies that attach to these milestones. So it might be, for example, a business is really, really does most of its BD through referencing, for argument's sake, one of those kind
Mm.
of lost forms a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So that comes earlier into the process, right? They screen candidates, but part of what they need to do is get referees. So what they're
Mm.
doing early doors is they're talking about how do you screen a candidate? How do you take effective references? Now we've got those references. How are we now going to get you to take those references from the people? How are we then going to get you to build a relationship with that manager? That's milestones 2, milestones 3. So
Mm.
that by the end of that kind of 12-week period, every couple of weeks, the person comes in and they know what they're doing. I mean, I come from a background where I worked a lot in tech, right? And in
Mhm.
tech, there's these things called sprints, right? There's
Mm.
agile working, there's sprints. Sprints are 2-week cycles
Mhm.
where you've got a small chunk of things to do, a manageable chunk of things to do with a defined end goal, right? Where you need to get to, tasks to do to get there. If you brought that into recruitment, you're able to really drive people through. This is the plan for the next 2 weeks.
Mm.
Once we get there, this is where we're going. And you always talk about that, that monthly cycle. That will really help onboarding people. I think the other thing to say for this is once you've started that cycle, that never stops.
Mm.
So that onboarding happens throughout an entire career. It just once you've
Yeah.
moved to management pathway, your milestones change slightly where you want to get
Mm.
to in that 2-4 week period, right? Which means, really importantly, that you do it with experienced starters too. Because I'm sure Charles, I know Bobby's seen it. You've probably seen experienced hires come in where they've been interviewed, and everyone in the business is so excited for them
Yep.
coming in, right? They're really excited. They think they're going to bring in the world because they interview so well. Because recruiters are damn good salespeople, really, really good at selling
But
themselves,
to add to that, we're really poor at creating a
screening
proper
them.
at
Yeah.
screening them properly
Yeah.
So you
because
come
there's
in,
a lack of context, isn't there?
Yeah.
Because there if you build 100, 150 grand or you build 300 grand, but that 300 grand has come from leads passed versus that
Hmm.
person who's built 150 grand from from a cold desk in the middle of, a Siberian style cold desk.
Yeah.
Who's the better recruiter for my business?
Yeah.
Depends on what I'm trying to do. Is it do I need people to service accounts or do I need people to build something from scratch? Do I need
Mm.
those hunters? And so we don't look at those things. And so
Hmm.
if you're then not looking at those things, you're not going to create the right onboarding process.
Mm.
And then that person will leave because that job is not what they thought it was. And which was going to lead me on to my point around just have these two words: manage expectations. If you can manage expectations, you can create accountability. And
yeah.
if you can create accountability, then it creates a proper process.
Mm.
But not doing either of those things, there is no point doing it.
Yeah. Well, I'm dying inside because when you mentioned about the senior hire, I had a guy that came in from a fairly large tech recruitment firm doing contract recruitment. Basically said he didn't need any training, and I said this to a client the other day. I basically just pulled him aside, and his manager was like, "Mate, he's amazing. He don't need training." Rah, rah, rah. And I was like, "Okay, cool. I'm just going to sit down with him and just test his knowledge of how he would do a candidate qualification, etc." So I just put him on the spot and I was just like, let's just do a quick role play then. So I'm Joe Bloggs, contracts tech guy, blah, 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 qualify me. And he started to shit himself. And bear in mind, you guys have met me. I'm not exactly a imposing guy. I'm not really a scary guy at all. I'm quite friendly. And I was just like, you've done recruitment for a long period of time. This is a piece of piss. Like, I'm not even going to go hard on you. He's like, I don't really like role plays, blah, blah, blah. So immediately in my head, I'm thinking, okay, you see, like your first day, does he have the right mindset, attitude, and stuff? But I'm just going to go light on the guy. He'd done the role play, and I left the room, went and grabbed his manager, and was like, "That was dreadful. Like what you were saying earlier, Shane, about the why is that, why else, what else, etc. None of that. Just it was about 2 minutes." And I asked him, "How do you think he done?" And he was like, "Yeah, fine. That's exactly how I do it normally. Like, got the information. I think it was fine." His manager said to me, "Look, I just want to get him on the phone and see what he's like." They listened to one phone call and they immediately pulled me aside and went, put him through the whole academy, put him through 3 weeks. I cannot have him speaking to candidates on the market. He obviously interviewed phenomenally well, which by the way, I did when I joined Projectus. And for the first 3 months, I nearly got sacked twice because I was terrible. Because I come from a completely different market doing healthcare contract recruitment. But it happens so many times. And
Because we don't ask the right things. We
mm,
just don't ask the right things. Again, we want, and again, this is for recruiters, this is for people hiring, whichever way forward. If you want, you want to understand the context of what they've done their role in and the challenges they face and how they've overcome those challenges. If you can get to understand those, that's when you know when you've got the right person or not. And that's
mm,
cool. Some people just aren't the right fit for businesses. So unfortunately, when we are time poor, we can tend to make very rash decisions.
yeah,
You know, I did it the other day. I think one of the outlets was closing in about 20 minutes, and I needed a coat, and I just literally bought a coat and left. Didn't think about whether it was the right one or not. But
yeah,
it's because we do these things.
mm,
So if we can get to a point where we go, you know what, is this the right coat for what I'm doing?
mm,
Possibly not. Right, actually put it back on the shelf. But for some reason we get so engrossed in the idea of, headcount bonuses or growing out
yeah.
by headcount that we don't think about the profitability per head and how do they go about thinking about creating that profitability.
Mm. That's something that Leisha said on the podcast, and she got really passionate about it. That not
Yeah,
enough recruit.
we've spoken a couple of times about it, Leisha and I.
Yeah, yeah, and I understand it. Like, why? Just on that, like, I want to hear your guys' perspective. Why don't more recruitment businesses measure profitability?
Because it's probably easier to just look at a billing number. Simple as that, right? It's so easy to just go, right, this is the number, this is the defined number. Plus, then you've probably got some complexity around people being on different salaries who are in the same role,
Hmm.
like for example. And then suddenly if that profitability is being shared, openly throughout the room,
Hmm.
suddenly people are like, wait, hold up, we've got the same target or we're on the same number. How is
Yeah,
my profitability so much higher or lower? Right.
yeah,
Um, but whereas a defined, you need to make this much money,
mm,
even though those numbers are always kind of arbitrary, right? Whether
mm,
it's an 8.3, a 10, a 12.5, a 15, a 20K, that's still an arbitrary number,
mm,
right? But they're easier to just have as universal. That's probably what I would say, Bobby.
Yeah, I think it's about. Yeah, I was going to say I'm just trying to formulate the right answer. I think that we don't look at profitability enough because yeah, we're too busy thinking about, everything is judged on GP.
mm,
But it's not but it's GP brought in, and the old fallacy was you bring enough people in, you get more GP. Whereas what we don't generally tend to do is look at the existing people within our business and go, how can I get more from them
mm,
in the right possible way? And funny enough, a lot of people say that, or certainly there's lots of McKinsey research that gets done into why people leave jobs. And one of the biggest things is a lack of progression and development.
mm,
And yeah, like I say, we use a graphic that shows that quite evidently. And so if you're not helping those people in that really profitable stage of their career, that 18 months to 4 years kind of bracket of consultants, and you're not helping them develop and you're not helping them get more out of what they're doing, then that's when they leave. And so that's why I think we seem to think that we want to put so much effort, or if we put so much effort, if they leave because of this high attrition industry that we live in,
mm,
that all that investment's gone.
mm,
So I think there's a few reasons around that. But again, what we then tend to see is that we leave the top billers alone. And it's a bit like, and sorry, Shane, I know I keep using Man City instead of Man United as an example. But if you look at someone like Erling Haaland, top scorer, top performer, top biller in the Premier League, probably last
mm,
2 seasons, right? Do you think that he is not going to training? Do you think that Pep Guardiola is saying, no, no, mate, you don't need to go to that training session today because you already know it? Of course not.
mm,
Everyone needs a performance improvement plan. Everyone. It doesn't matter, from MD all the way down to trainee. Everyone needs a performance improvement plan.
mm,
And so if you can do that, that's when you'll increase profitability, and then people are really happy. And then you don't have to hire you can hire more people, and they're going to come in, and it's going to, that's when businesses grow properly. But Hey ho.
Mm.
I think just building on that, that then helps when you're onboarding people,
Yeah.
because when you're onboarding people of an experience level, there's the assumption that they might know what they're doing, right? Going back to what I was saying a minute
Mm.
ago. And because of that, they don't get that support through. Whereas they probably left because they felt unsupported, as Bobby's pointed out. And they're coming in thinking they know what they're doing. Now imagine they're sitting in a meeting with their manager, right? And their
Mm.
manager says, right, I want to help you become the best version of you. That's what we do at this business. Here are the 5 things currently I'm working to get better at with my boss. What are the 3 or 4 things that you want us to help you get better at now? And then there's that like continuity of
Yeah.
learning development versus someone coming in and saying, right, what do you want to be better at? Where someone brand new, coming into a business is always going to say, no, I think I'm good. I'm good, because
Mm.
you're a little bit worried about your job, right?
Yeah.
As if there's that openness with everyone having these development structures from day one through their entire career with the business, it's going to be something that, number one, is going to make hiring easier. Number two, is
Mhm.
going to make attrition lower. And number three, is going to make everyone at the business better.
Yeah, 100%. I think especially we talked pretty much at the start of the show about what this newer generation are looking for in a job and stuff. And I would say that the L&D, whether they call it that or not, but that personal development, not even necessarily just professional, but that personal development, I would say is very, very high on people's radars at the moment. People want to develop and learn new skills, especially if you're going to come into the recruitment industry. So if you're a business that doesn't offer any of that, I think you're mental, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, and I know we talk about Gen Z and Gen Alpha and all that, all these different generations. The key thing is, the same questions have existed. It's just how they're answered now that's different. How do you look after me?
Mm,
Back in the early, geriatric millennial, Gen X boomer stages, it was just, how do you look after me financially? Now
mm,
is how do you look after me, not necessarily just financially, but also how do you help me develop as a person?
yeah,
And that doesn't necessarily mean that I need to go on coaching sessions or formal training. It's actually how do you make sure that you look after my best interests?
yeah.
But if we're not doing enough of that, and that's why people get lazy, because they see, or lazy or quiet quitting or whatever you want to see within your
Mm,
businesses, that you talk about these particular generations with, is because they don't seeing what they were set out. You haven't managed their expectations,
mm,
and therefore you're not getting the level of output that you want. No
mm,
learning and development, no external trainer, and I'm speaking probably on behalf of all three of us, and probably all of them, all out
hmm.
there, can work miracles if you haven't done anything to help these people,
Yeah,
or at least willing to show that you're willing to help, or see that you get help yourself.
yeah.
Because we love empathy.
Hmm.
Everything that we do is based around empathy. It's understanding that someone else is coming from that particular environment, and I can see that they're doing the same thing that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And so if you can get that into your business straight away, then you're not really gonna have as many problems with your onboarding and your retention.
Mm. I always say when I'm meeting a new client or when I start working with them, exactly what you just said. I'm not a magician. I can't work miracles. I can't get your lowest performer. I mean, I can do things to help them, but it's not going to be solely, and again, I'll speak on behalf of you, it won't solely be because of your training and coaching that someone is a top performer. Erling Haaland is not the top goal scorer just because their striker coach is phenomenal or Pep is phenomenal, which, but they both probably are, right? And Pep definitely is. But I always say to people, I go in thirds, right? I will come in and do phenomenal training, coaching, and stuff like that. Great, but they also need to like really, really want it. If the recruiter doesn't want to develop, doesn't want to be successful, etc., doesn't
Mm.
matter how good the coaching is, how good the theory of the training is, it's fucking pointless. But if the recruiter really, really wants it and they work with Shane, Bobby, me, whoever else once a week or whenever it is, but then their manager or the business owner doesn't then reinforce it, there is no continuity like what Shane was talking about, then unfortunately it won't stick as a habit. And then all that money you've spent and all that time you've invested just goes through the fucking window and it's just pointless.
Yeah, absolutely. And it works the other way. We as trainers, we probably do the training sessions, and then we need to make sure that we include follow-up as part of that package. And therefore, people can then, get that level of catching up. We do catch-ups at the end of all of our sessions, or
Mm,
it's like a few weeks after, just so that people can see what's been going on. And I'll be
Yeah.
honest, it helps us stroke our egos because we hear all the wins and it's like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but also that means that they've thought about it and actually done something with it. And so
Yeah.
it's I think, I know we talk about getting 1% better, and we'll talk on that in a bit, but these are little things that are really cheap or free that you can do to make things much better within your business.
Mm. Well, look, I'm conscious of time. One of the topics we were going to talk about was what we can do to start the new quarter or start the new year. But I'm conscious of time, and there's something that I wanted to discuss with you boys actually, because oftentimes what happens is things will pop up and then things will just fire off in my head, and
Mm, go for
it's
it.
so, it's so tricky sometimes, especially with two other people. It's the first time I've done it with two people. I'm like, oh, what about that? What about that? But you talked about like performance plans for people. So we've talked about the interview, we talked about the onboarding. I typically work a lot with companies that have senior consultants, principals, directors, etc. And I'm coaching those more sort of senior people.
Mm.
From your guys' experience and perspective, what does a performance plan look like for a more senior consultant or even just a recruiter that's like 1 or 2 years experience as a recruiter on track to go to senior? They're fairly high performing. You come into their business, or let's just say, for example, maybe a business doesn't want to invest in an external person because they think they can do it themselves. So maybe a bit of advice for those people. But like, what would you say is a good structured sort of performance plan for someone past their first year who's looking like they're going to be good?
Yeah, I guess I'll start off with that. So yeah, whenever you're looking at experienced hires, luckily you've got an element of them knowing their own game. So this
Mm,
is where, to all those internal L&D people, if you can get a coaching qualification, it's the first thing I'd say to get. It was the first thing I got when I went into L&D at S3. So I'd strongly recommend it. And funny enough, it was the first thing I said to Shane as well, that he needed to get done. And so you know, looking at that, how can I get you from here to here? That's all I'm looking at.
mm,
Because funny enough, millennials, Gen Z, that's all I care about. If I can get from there to there in the quickest time possible.
hmm
So and creating pathways to make that work. So, if I was using the Erling Haaland example, great, you scored 26 goals last year. You were injured for quite a bit of it. Absolutely fine. What can I do to help you get to what is a number that works for you for next year?
mm,
Talk me through it. Where's it going to come from? How can we help you create that and make that happen?
hmm
And so unfortunately, people development is a team sport. There's got to be a few people around you to help make that happen. And that's internal, external, whatever that looks like. And so if you're gonna look at how do you help experienced hires get better, look at where they want to get better. Look at what they think their strengths and weaknesses are, and also document what you think their strengths and weaknesses are as well.
mm,
Sometimes there are, so I was a trainer before I was a recruiter. And in
mm,
the previous training company that I worked in, it was doing things like Lion's Den feedback. So getting 360 feedback on these people to see what's good,
mm,
essentially doing a bit of a SWOT analysis on them.
mm.
And those things are really powerful because then you can kind of see what people think about you from lots of different angles. And so yeah, there's loads of the problem is I could go on about this for about an hour, but and probably waffle my way through most of it. But yeah, there are loads of things that you can do to go, how can I get my experienced people from here to here? And it essentially helps them it starts off by you helping them empower themselves
Mm.
and how you go about doing that.
Yeah, nice. I often sometimes overthink it in my head when I go into businesses, and a lot of what I do is coaching, and it's like one-to-one coaching on and off desk and stuff like that. And whenever I try to put like a plan together, I oftentimes overthink it in my head and go like I feel like I need to be going into more detail. But then actually you look at it and you go, especially for companies that have invested in like an analytics tool or companies that take some time to track all their data, which I always suggest to every business I speak to, just fucking track your data because anyway,
Mm.
that's a whole other fucking conversation. But then I think about it and I'm like, right, so you're struggling to pull jobs at the moment. So if we put together a performance plan, we need to actually look at the data to see what you're doing. How do we get you from doing 5 BD calls a day to 10, etc.? If the jobs that you're pulling on, say for example, you're only filling 1 in 5, why is that? Do we need to work on the job qualification process, etc.? So actually, like it's good that I have these conversations with you guys because because sometimes I sit there and overthink it. And I wanted to see what you wanted to say as well, Shane. But I really do think that for the recruitment stuff, the sales stuff, the data stuff, it is really, and from our perspectives and L&D managers that listen to this, business owners, when you're coaching, it's really just getting that person to understand what they need to do more, or how to get better at that type of stuff. The one area I will say that is very tricky is the mindset and attitude and stuff like that, because that's not overly quantifiable. It's very difficult to quantify. If someone's not doing the numbers, for example, and they're like, I don't know why I'm not doing it, etc. It's like a mindset thing. And again, that's another thing that we could probably talk about for a long period of time. But what do you think of that? Sorry, Shane.
Yeah, that's fine. So, funnily enough, Charles, just on my answer, because I was going to say I'm going to be really boring here and just say it's data, it's analytics, right? That's the crux of it throughout the
Hmm.
entire thing, right? As someone gets more experienced, their ratios, they should know inside out, back to
Yep.
front, what to do, how to do it. You're also then potentially going to have different drives and ambitions that they're going to
Hmm.
be working towards, right? Because hopefully they've started to achieve some of those things that they wanted before. And some of those, honestly, might be just hitting my target every year. And I know what
Mm.
I need to do to hit my target, and that's what I need to do. And that person isn't necessarily that invested in getting better. And
Mm.
actually, that might be okay. Every business needs a Gary Neville, right? Turn it over to Man United, right? Someone who just turns up and delivers 150 grand every year and is good for that kind of number.
Mm.
They know how to
Mm,
do it, they know how to
totally.
turn things around. But when the market shifts, they need to up the numbers and they need to be aware that they're going to need to do that. But everything needs to be numbers driven and data driven, because then you can sit and you can identify, right, is it a skill issue? Is it a will issue?
Mm.
Or is it a situational issue where actually we need to realign as a business what we expect of this person for either PESTLE reasons, so market change reasons, and
Hmm.
we might need to look at actually, right, up the volume, but we might need to
Hmm.
balance it somewhere in the middle. Um, but if it's a skill issue, where's the skill issue? And if it's a will issue, how can I link this back to drive and motivation, or
Mm.
just be a human being a lot of the time and help that person get back onto course, right? So if you can build it out using data and analytics to identify, is there a skill issue in here? If there's not, and you can't see where it is,
Mm.
get someone, and you've worked through it with someone and you're confident that everything they're doing right. It might be they need to do more, right? But then kind of refer back to will, and then
Mm.
talk about the situation, see what changes there are. Because at the end of the day, yeah, I think the general consensus is the market is beginning to pick up now. It's been a really
Hmm.
tough year and a half, certainly for a lot of businesses. So hopefully some of those situational differences,
Mm.
challenges will be changing. But um, kind of lost my train of thought a little bit. Hopefully we'll see more people just, being able to come through this now. But yeah,
Yeah.
focus on data and then identify, is it a skill or will or a kind of a situational issue?
Yeah, no, I love it, mate. Do you know what's really, really funny? When I done my leadership training course, the first session was all about data, and it was with Ashley Rice. Bit of a shout out. He was one of the only times I've ever done training, and I've remembered it. A lot of trainers, unfortunately, and I'm sure you guys know other trainers where they're like the least engaging people in the entire fucking universe, and if it's done remotely, it's
And if I
like,
don't,
oh.
if I don't know them, then it's probably me.
We're not saying anything on that one, pal.
Yeah, I'm just not going to buy it. But yeah, the first session was all about data, and he's like a very detail orientated person. Pre ADHD diagnosis, Charles, you mentioned the word data. I just think boring, and I couldn't sit still when he was talking through the analytics on Cube and all the rest of it. I still use that training session as an L&D coach to this day. Whenever it's a new month with my clients, I always use the ratios on whatever analytics tool they have to reverse engineer all their targets and create like an action plan and go back to like the skill and the will. But it's really interesting because like back then when I was like 22, 23 years old,
Mm.
like data analytics, I was like, oh, Shane, bore off. You're so boring.
Yeah,
Whereas now I'm
yeah.
like,
Well, I'm
fucking,
gonna.
it's the most important. It's like the biggest
Well,
fucking game changer.
well, I go even further back and say to people, look, remember your maths exams. A lot of what you did wasn't about getting the right answer, it was about showing you're working. And recruitment,
Mm.
one of those businesses from top down that you have to show you're working.
Mm.
So, as you quite rightly, if you reverse engineering a deal, and we have a whole we go through a whole kind of pyramid system where we look at it from candidate perspective and client
Hmm.
perspective. If you're looking at the mechanics of a deal, how many jobs do you need to have an interview? How many jobs do you need to have? How many conversations do you
Mm,
need to have to be able to get those things happening? And same things from candidate perspective. How many interviews do you need to have per placement? How many jobs do you need or CVs do you need to send per interview? It's really sad, but some of those things are so important. So if you could spend a bit of time understanding the data in your business and whether you're an internal, an external, I did an audit day with the company I'm with right at the moment, and it was just the most empowering thing because it's just helped us simplify the process.
mm.
Because you're right, when you say, "Oh, I don't have a methodology, I overcomplicate things," it's because we don't really think. Actually, we need to make things simple because people understand simple.
Mm.
Therefore, our job is to help them understand what the simple part is from all these complexities that are out there.
Yeah, mate, especially for recruiters. That's like the biggest lesson I learned when I first worked in L&D. Obviously, my sort of coaching accreditations come from like the NLP space or the rest of it. And the first like ever bit of training I put together was like so NLP and so complicated. In my brain, I was like, yeah, this makes sense. But for like a trainee consultant that's fresh to the industry, it's like you just need to simplify it. But yeah, anyway, listen, I'm very conscious of time. And for anyone,
Cool.
I don't know if you heard that noise, but my phone's on silent because I've learned from my mistake of like having my phone on loud. The phone link on my laptop is off, yet somehow a call made it through to my laptop. So if anyone heard
We
that
didn't hear
noise,
anything.
oh,
We
you
didn't
didn't?
do
Okay.
anything, mate.
Maybe it was just me, but I freaked out for a second. If you're watching this, you could probably see my face. But anyway, the last question I like to ask this at the end of every podcast is following today's episode, how do people in recruitment or how do people get 1% better in recruitment? So whoever would like to go first, let me know your answer.
I'll take it, Bobby, if you want. So
Go
this
for it.
one's going to be like, actually a little bit of a challenge for people. We did a little bit of research into a load of recruitment companies, right? And we
Mhm.
noticed the three words that most recruitment companies use. In fact, I think it's something like 87% of people use the first one, which is specialist. Yeah, about 80% of people use award winning and 78 odd percent use relationship driven. So by using those words, specialist, relationship driven, award winning, maybe less so because you're not going to go and sell that to a customer,
Mhm.
but specialist and relationship driven, by just using those words in your conversation, you're sounding like every other recruiter. What I want to challenge you to do is think about what do I need to do to get them, to get my prospects, my customers, my candidates to tell me that I'm a specialist. What
Mm.
information can I gather that's going to make them go, how the hell did they know that? Yeah.
Mm.
What can I do that's going to help them just identify those words with me? So stop using the words, stop telling people you're something and start showing it. That's probably my big takeaway. And just the
Yeah,
stop
I'll build on
delivering.
that
Go on,
if
Bobby.
that's all right. So yeah, so I'd be saying if people want to get probably actually 5% better, it's not even 1%,
Yeah.
is that look at the problems you solve. Can you articulate what are could you understand the challenges of your candidates, your clients, your customers? And can you come up with solutions? Does your recruitment plan come up with solutions to those problems? Because at the end of the day, everyone's got the word consultant at the back end of their title. And a consultant understands problems, and challenges and create solutions. So if you can start doing that, the world will be a better place.
Love that. And you'll be leaving your market 1% better off. I like what you were saying about leaving recruitment as your why. I absolutely love that. It's interesting because I had a guest on that spoke on exactly what you were talking about there, Bobby, about identifying the problems and stuff. Like his approach to cold calling isn't like, I've got this candidate, I know you're hiring, blah, blah, blah. It's like in my market, typically a VP, a CTO, etc., will encounter one of these three problems. I'm just wondering if they ring a bell to you, and if the client comes back and says, "No, we don't have any of those issues," he would just ask some questions like, "Really? Like you have none of those issues?" And maybe they'll encounter some, and maybe it's just not the right
All
customer,
right.
not the right timing. It's
And I'll be
fine.
like, oh, that's absolutely fine. What is the biggest challenge you face at the moment then?
Exactly, right?
Nice, easy. There's loads of stuff.
It,
And like I say, it's just, yeah, I could go on
yeah,
about it forever. So I'm not
Actually,
going to.
that's one of my favorite openers, full stop. Cuts through any preset objection that a person might have because they'll go into the call, they'll expect a pitch,
hmm
you'll say something completely different, and then they have to give you some information
mm,
while they're thinking of what to say to get you off the phone in some cases, right?
yeah,
Because they're so not used to that. So
mm.
yeah, that opener specifically, absolutely love it.
Yeah, and I just want to just say, Shane, that I really like your point because it's very different to any of the answers I've got so far, and I've recorded when this comes out, there'll probably be like 15, 20 episodes out or whatever. But it's really interesting, mate, because every business I speak to, like for me, my sort of niche ICP company that I want to work with are the quote specialist organizations. I don't really enjoy working with a business, and Bobby and I have joked about this with the temps and the perms that do everything,
Yeah,
and
I
and you
can't
know,
add value to that.
I don't, yeah, I don't really come from that background. I come from a sales tech, like healthcare, like very niche sort of backgrounds and stuff. But I do echo what you say there, Shane. And I think for a business owner or a recruiter listening to this, just be mindful of like your specialist. Like so many people do that. And what you said there, mate, is a big, big takeaway for people. It's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Love it. Well, boys, thank you very much for coming on. I've really, really enjoyed this. You mentioned before we clicked record that you've got a couple of very interesting projects that you're working on or have worked on. Before we close off, just tell us a little bit about what you've had going on.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, as a fair few people will know, well, last year when this time goes out, I had a few issues, and so funny enough, we whilst in hospital, I was thinking about a couple of ideas, and one of them was a psychometric for recruiters. And so what we've done is worked with, workplace psychologists, people, bigwigs in the industry, HR professionals to create a psychometric to help people recruit better,
Hmm.
help certainly internally for recruitment based on three profiles around proactivity, strategy, and relationship driven, which most recruitment businesses want. And it's just we're at the moment where we're testing that out. So actually, we'll send you I think we've sent you a copy of the test
I'll
before.
have to double check my email,
If not,
but
I
yeah,
will send you it
please do.
anyway to have a
Yeah,
look
yeah,
at.
yeah.
So that's one thing. And then funny enough, the other thing we've been
Just to
doing,
add to that, Bob, before you move on, I
yeah,
think the slight difference with that versus a lot of other psychometrics out there, every question, every situation is a recruitment specific
Love it.
question. So it's a question that recruiters will encounter every day. When no answer is the right answer, they're just right for different
Mm.
businesses. So that's the thing that kind of maybe separates that. Go on,
yeah.
Bobby.
Yeah, and then what else are we doing? We've created because funny enough, you're talking about kind of getting the right things out of power hours and stuff like that, or
Hmm.
getting the right things out of their business development. We've created a deck of cards to help people with that. So we're going to be getting that out. It'll hopefully be out and about by the time this comes out. So yeah,
Nice.
look out for the Power Hour Power Pack.
Love it. The Power Hour Power Pack. Wicked. Awesome, guys. Well, look, again, thanks so much for coming on. I know we organized this probably over a month and a half ago or so, but I've
Hmm.
personally really, really enjoyed it. I always enjoy speaking to both of you guys. I'm sure people listening to this, if you made it this far, I hope that you've got value because if you didn't, then you probably weren't listening, if I'm being quite honest. But yeah, that's pretty much everything for the show. If you've made it this far, please like, subscribe. We're on Spotify, YouTube. I'm trying my best with Apple. When this comes out, hopefully this is on Apple, but Apple, you're long. Honestly, you're long. But anyway, thank you very much for listening, guys. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.